Hey friends out there in YouTube land, Robert Ham here, and today I'd like to talk to you about the Sony a7 II. But you saw the title of the video, so you know that this video is actually about the Fujifilm X100f. The reality is I'd love to give you a great comparison of these two cameras today, but I think that this series of videos has more to do with a conversation rather than an overview. And that conversation I'll be having with you, but we're not going to start it with this great camera. Albeit she's a tricky lady, she's got her quirks, and we'll talk about that later. But today, let's actually talk about the Fujifilm X100f. The Fujifilm X100 series is a camera series that I got started on the X100S, the second edition, and skipped the third edition, the T, and picked up the fourth edition, the F. And it's a series of cameras that I've had for three very specific reasons. Number one, it's got a very high sync speed leaf shutter. That leaf shutter is absolutely amazing, and it allows you to sync flash higher than most cameras sync flash. A leaf shutter opens and closes kind of like an iris of an eye, and that's what makes it very special, instead of a focal plane shutter which goes left or right. And in this case, the camera can sync with its flash at all shutter speeds that the camera supports, which is up to 1/8,000th of a second natively. And it is true that the range of the synchronization differs depending on the aperture, but even at 1/1000th of a second, which is the fastest it can sync wide open at f2, we're still 2 or 3 stops beyond what most cameras will, what most focal plane shutter cameras will allow. In fact, we don't even need to use like high-speed sync or anything like that, which is a benefit of a leaf shutter because high-speed sync lowers the output of a flash in order to pulse multiple times in order to make it strobe while your shutter is rolling, while it's opening and closing. Not so with the leaf shutter. In fact, the leaf shutter, because of the way that it opens and closes, the flash syncs at the same speed as the shutter because it's blasting it all at one time, because the shutter's opening like an iris rather than going across like a little slit. But that's only the first reason that I like it, the leaf shutter. The second reason is the neutral density filter. There's a 3-stop ND filter built right into this camera. That's extremely powerful. That takes that wide open setting where you are at 1/1000th of a second with an f2 and puts you into a situation where maybe you would need 1/8000th of a second with a mechanical shutter. Well, that's really cool. There we can see those 3 stops are being used very powerfully, and if you go to something like f4 or f8, then you can even see where you would be even in a brighter situation when you apply those synchronizations. At 1/4000th of a second at f8, which is where we would be synchronizing at that point in time, that gets up past 64,000th of a second, which is pretty crazy if you were to convert that 3-stop in shutter speed to an actual mechanical shutter. Lots of power in this thing. And the other reason that I like it, the last reason, the third reason, which is really the heart of the camera, is actually the lens. The 23mm lens on here gives an equivalent on full frame, remember this is APS-C, to a 35mm field of view. I absolutely love that. I think it's a great pairing with this camera. And this altogether gives you a package that allows you to go out, hit some street photography, even do some street portraits, and really just have an excellent time with an all-in-one system. Now, they do make some adapters for this. You can get a wide-angle adapter to go to 28. You can also get a telephoto adapter, which I have, which will take you up to about a 50. Both of those in equivalency to 35mm. But the reality is, on its own as it stands, the X100 series, this 35mm equivalent, neutral density filter with a leaf shutter and high synchronization speed, works like a champ. Okay, so that part right there was for those of you that just didn't understand how important this little camera is and why it's important. I guess that's a better way to put it. For me, what does it mean? Like, why make a video now? Well, I guess I make the video because the X100f has been out for a couple years, I think 2017. You guys can check me down in the comments below if that's incorrect. But 2017, and there's rumors that there's going to be a new Fujifilm Series 5, the X100 Series 5, whatever that's going to be, coming out soon. And even a very prominent blogger who I like his videos and respect a lot, Samuel L. Streetlife, made a video about why he's moving away from the Fujifilm X100f. And lots of times when people make these videos about why they're moving, it has more to do with their photography and how it's growing and what they're using, rather than the capabilities of the camera specifically. I'd suggest you go watch that video over by Sammy, but the main point is that he wants to move into a little bit more aggressive kind of photography that has all of the features built into one, and the one feature that he's lacking in the X100f is actually the video feature. So in his video he talks about why he upgraded to the X H1, especially with all of these really great deals that are going on for it now, just before Fujifilm's supposed to announce a new camera or a new series of generation 2, 3, or 4 cameras. So great point, great opportunity to continue, and great reason for him. However, I had an opportunity to use this camera as a B camera by mistake one time because I needed an extra view. I needed some extra B-roll, and I had never really used the video settings of the camera, and I just kind of ran into a spot where I had to happen on the spot. So I set the camera up in a location, turned it on, pressed go, and rolled out. And the reality was it produced some excellent 1080p video. Even at 30 frames a second, even at a 35 megabyte bit rate, it still produced a really nice looking image. And I was quite I was quite impressed, if you know what I mean. So when I look at this camera, actually kind of that opens up the concept of what this camera is good for. No, there's no stabilization inside the lens or on the image sensor. All of that type of thing would have to be done in post. But if you were using it on something like a tripod, there's no reason that you couldn't get some quick B-roll and even some direct footage. I remember looking at the X100s and taking some video with the X100s, and it was really, really janky, if you know what I mean. It was no good for me. But more importantly, when I think about this camera as a kit, I think about how it actually stacks up to what it is that I'm taking with me. Let's think about this. In order for me to be able to shoot with flash on here, and this of course is a 50mm lens, and be able to synchronize with flash out and about, I've got to get my shutter speed down to 1/200th of a second. That's the sync speed on this camera. Well, yeah, that requires the use of a neutral density filter. So there's no reason to use a leaf shutter in this particular situation. We're using a focal plane shutter, but just look at the difference in the size. I mean, even if I were to grab a 50mm conversion lens and put on here like we've got, I'll do that while we're talking. The size difference is remarkable, you know? And that's what you're really getting when you have a smaller camera like this. It allows you to be pretty invisible. Now, I have a flash on the front of it that you've seen, which is the EF X20. This flash came out when the X Pro 1 debuted. It was the corresponding flash for that camera, and it works great. I absolutely love it. I wish it had one thing, which was bounce. I wish I could tilt the head up in order for it to bounce, because there are some situations where I would prefer to bounce rather than to have just straight directional flash. But even in that instance, this flash works extremely well. Paired together on this camera, you get quite a lot of bang for your buck. Let's just go ahead and give you that visual again. Now, it is true I could put a smaller flash on the A7 II, right? But what we're talking about really is just the camera body as they'd be used. Now, when we look right here, I've got a battery grip on the A7 II, and that gives me about, I don't know, 600 shots, somewhere in there. And of course, I don't have a battery grip for the Fujifilm X100f, but check out the actual camera itself. The size, the weight difference, you can see, maybe you can't feel the weight, but you can see there's a gigantic difference in what you're actually carrying around, okay, even from the back if you'd like to see. And that makes a big deal. When I'm out photographing a wedding, this is a big thing to carry with me. And I've got this that I'm shooting with as my main. But man, how nice is it to be able to switch up right here? The difference when I use these cameras happened to be more in how I process the images. And I'd like to talk about that for just 1 second as we get ready. We're hitting 9 minutes, and we'll end this up soon. The way I process images with the Fujifilm, or any Fujifilm image, specifically not the X-H1, because I believe that has the bare sensor, but with any of the Fujifilm cameras that have the X-Trans sensors, is I work in Lightroom, and I actually work off of the hue, saturation, and luminance panel much more than I do the basic corrections of like exposure, your shadows, your highlights, and your blacks and things like that. And the reason I do that is because there's so much more color information because of the kind of pixel array that they're using, that X-Trans array, that 9x9 grid of red, blue, green, blue that goes on that grid that kind of repeats throughout, as opposed to just a straight red, blue, green, blue, red, blue on a pattern. Kind of more like randomizes the pixels in such a way that gives you quite a bit more information to pull from when you're using the hue, saturation, and luminance. So for an example, my face right now, luckily today, I'm not broken out or anything, but it's kind of consistent all across with my skin tone. But let's say I had a family or a lady or a gentleman that had some rosacea going on. You know, that just means like red cheeks, red face. It's part of like psoriasis and different things. Well, in Lightroom, I'd have to clear that up a couple ways and maybe even go to Photoshop, or maybe just use some brushes, some desaturation brushes, or the texture tool or the clarity tool. But a really easy way to tighten that up is actually just to go into the hue, saturation, and luminance, and as long as you don't have a lot of red in the background or violet or pink in the background, I can change the hues in order to isolate the reds and then turn the saturation down on the red. In fact, I can even change the reds to match a color channel of the face, which generally has more yellows and orange in it. Well, that's interesting. That works very well when working with the Fujifilm files because of that X-Trans sensor, and that's my only reasoning why. I can't think of another reason why the that you would have so much easier time using the hue, saturation, and luminance. You can also do that to brighten faces. Let's say you've got a family portrait shot and you want to brighten everybody's face. You can very easily go into the hue, saturation, and luminance, and then instead of lifting shadows in the basic panel, you can actually lift the color channel of the face so that you actually lift it. So like the orange, you can lift the orange, you can lighten it, and it'll brighten the face. Now it's true, you can absolutely do that with your bare arrangement sensor. And most cameras like Canon and Nikon, Fuji's really the only one using the X-Tran. That'll work. You can go in there and do exactly what we talked about, but it's just not as pushable. You can't push it as far because the information that it has is not the same. But it has a much better opportunity to be pushed using the basic corrections. So when I shoot and edit the images that come out of my Sony camera, I'm generally using quite a bit more of the basic panel and pushing highlights or shadows and things like that in order to get the final adjustment. I will still work in the hue, saturation, and luminance. But with the Fujifilm, I'll actually go in and use the hue, saturation, and luminance much more than I'll use the basic corrections. Of course, you can always set curves, but that's kind of something that I do as a finalized look or aesthetic when I need to. I just find it really interesting. Another note is I really enjoy the organic look out of this sensor. This sensor has a lot of, well, it's got a different characteristic than this sensor. I really liked the second generation X-Trans sensors, the 16 megabytes for Fujifilm. They had a lot of character. When they went to this third generation X-Trans, they become much more clinical, I think you should say, which is why I'm glad that Fuji allows you in JPEG mode to add grain back. And since I don't generally shoot in JPEG, I do a little bit of grain, introducing a little bit of noise, let's call it what it is, but a little bit of grain in Lightroom because I like just a little bit of grain to my images, even ones that are going to be displayed online, but especially if they're going to be used for print. Here, I truly enjoy the kind of organic look that this sensor produces. It's really nice. I know we weren't going to talk about these two side by side. I just kind of wanted to give you a quick comparison on why. And I know we're hitting 13 minutes. I don't like to hit 13 minutes, but we're going to finish up right now. The two cameras that I use mostly are these two cameras right here. I have a couple other ones that I use, but the reality is the Fujifilm X100f just works great. I can pick it up, I can roll, I can use it and enjoy it. The images are easy to edit on either one of them, between this one or the other one, but I think in the long run, this is the camera that I find myself taking with me pretty much on a day-to-day basis when I'm out and about. Beautiful imagery results. That neutral density filter that's built in pairs great with the circular polarizer that I've got on the front, which gives me an extra half of a stop or a stop of light, and the whole thing works well together with that flash. The only thing I would say about the EFX20 is, man, I would love for this to be able to bounce, but it can't. So Fujifilm, there you go, bounce. And the second thing I would enjoy would be if this would actually take AA's instead of AAA's, because the reset or the recycle time on it takes a little bit. So if you've got it on anything over like 1/4 power or higher, you're going to be a 1 or 2 second reset depending on what you are. If you're at like 1/32 power or so, I can pretty much pop all day long. The batteries seem to last. I get about 50 to 60 full pops on this, is what I feel from my experience as I'm out and about shooting with it. And if I'm in a really bright situation like a wedding on the beach, then yeah, that's a thing. Also, if you turn the camera off while this is on, it will turn it off. It's great news. But if you turn the camera back on while this flash is on, it will not turn the flash on. So you got to be aware of that if you're out photographing and a wedding or something. That just means that I keep my cycle to not turn off the camera, so the battery is on all the time when I turn the camera on. All in all, it's a great system I enjoy using, and I hope that kind of gives a little bit of a reason why it's not time to upgrade to another camera or move anywhere else. If you're like me, you probably haven't even experienced everything that the X100f can do for you. And I hope that you get out there and shoot with it and enjoy it as much as I do. I absolutely love mine. Guys, I'm Robert Ham. Hope you enjoyed. I'll catch you guys on the flip side.